So I'm going to go ahead and get started. We've had a can you all hear me? Just wave your hand if you can hear me. Good. Okay. Thank you. And so we've had a very interesting week. As you know, this is the week of the presidential election. And even though the election hasn't been called, I anticipate that it's going to be called one way or the other. And so I just think today's discussion is very important for us to look at going forward with the next 4 years of whoever is whoever is the president. And so we're going to talk about where do we go from here. And I'm just going to kind of review a little bit. As many of you already know, I have my doctorate degree in educational leadership. I've been in education for 24 years and counting. I've authored 12 books, 7 in the area of racial equity, 5 marriage books, the author of the book titled Promoting Positive Racial Teacher-Student Classroom Relationships. And what's also been nice about this journey is that I actually have a course that has been approved by the Pennsylvania Department of Education based off my book, Promoting Positive Racial Teacher-Student Classroom Relationships. And so there is a contest, and I will give you the rules for the contest at the end of this presentation. And so I want to begin with what is the Democratic Educational Program, or what is their platform? And I looked at what they were offering, and I kind of pulled the basic tenets out. And, you know, we've had the Republican educational platform for 4 years. And so I thought it was important to kind of encapsulate what they are focusing on. And of course, they're focusing on child care and dependent tax credit increase, which would put more money into the pockets of couples who have children and also make child care easier for them to afford. Also, the Democrats are talking about increasing Title I funding. Now, I don't know if many of you all know this, but in each school district, they actually have a Title I funding officer. They hire somebody just for that specific purpose, which means that it's very important. And what Title I does, it provides additional funds for schools with high percentages of low-income students. They also pay for students who are at risk, regardless of any of the disadvantages that they may have. And so that's part of the Democratic platform. The Republican platform did not focus as much on child care and dependent tax credits. They didn't take away the Title I funding, but it didn't become a focus for them, whereas the Democrats are talking about tripling the money that they're giving out for that. Also, the Democrats are talking about focusing on the STEAM education program. It used to be STEM, STEM, but what they did was they added A, which is art. So it's science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics. And so they want to infuse this program into our schools. Personally, I think it's a good idea. And I'll talk about that a little later. Also, the Democratic program, they want to take a closer look at the charter schools. One thing we know about the Republicans was that they wanted to move charter school funding to private schools. And what the Democrats are saying is that we don't want private schools to benefit from public monies. And we also want to make sure that they're protecting people's civil rights, as well as infusing racial equity into their schools. So that's a big difference between the two. We also, it says they want to provide a world-class education that enables students to lead meaningful lives, no matter what their specific category is. And the problem I have with this, though, is that they don't define what is a world-class education, and they don't define what is leading meaningful lives. What does that mean? Because that's got to be different for different populations. And so I had a little problem with that language. They want to make sure that schools do not get involved, or they want to make sure that they appropriately engage in responding to discrimination, bullying, and harassment. And this is something that's already in the law. It's already something that schools have to do. But the bigger difference is they state specifically, it says, we will protect the rights of transgender students. The Republican platform does not speak to transgender students. Also, they want to infuse civic literacy. Now, civic literacy means teaching the students the skills that they need to participate in making change into their community. And they're saying that this could include in voting, knowing how the government works, what are the rights and responsibilities of citizens and elected members of the government. But we already have that, and we already have that via social studies. I guess what puzzled me was knowledge and skills needed to participate in making change, because there's different, as we can see, there's different ways of making change. You can participate in protest, you can destroy people's property, you can write letters. So there's a lot of different avenues, and so they're not very clear in their platform in regards to civic literacy. They also talked about expanding and increasing the funding to the Department of Education Office of Civil Rights for Education. And what we do know is that the Republicans, they not only decided to reduce the funding, but they also decided to reduce the staff that responded to civil rights. They couldn't legally do away with or eliminate the Office of Civil Rights. And so that's a big difference between the Republican platform and the Democratic platform. Also, something that was new to me, and I didn't know that this existed, but they have what is called the Strength and Diversity Act of 2020. And so this is something that was already passed, but this is something that the Democrats want to focus on. And I didn't hear anything about this, but what they're saying is they want to increase federal funding to desegregate schools, and they want to provide monies for the different school districts that are doing, that have voluntary efforts to expand school diversity initiatives. And we do know that the Republicans, they swayed away from diversity initiatives because they stopped providing diversity training in the federal government. And so we know that the Republican Party was in opposition to that. Also, we know one of the other differences that I didn't write down was Republicans believed in that teachers should be able to carry weapons in the classroom, whereas the Democratic platform specifically states that we don't believe that we should have teachers should have weapons in the classroom. And so I want to talk a little bit about what I think should happen. And then I'll end the presentation and we'll get the panel to discuss what they think should happen. So as far as the STEAM education response, so STEM has been around for a number of years. It was in the most recent Republican candidacy presidency. So this is nothing new, and it has had an impact on better preparing students to go into the fields of science, technology, and engineering. But the problem that I have is that many of our African American males are not benefiting from this type of training. And we find that in this next slide, where it says the unemployment rate is 9.6%. The African American employment rate is 15.6. However, the unemployment rate for Black teenagers is 40%, almost 50%. And for the Black teenagers, if you include the ones who become discouraged and stop trying to find work, it's 70 to 80%. And so I think parents, especially Black parents, you have to do two things. First of all, teaching language arts or English has always been the primary focus. And if we're going to better prepare our African American population, there needs to be a shift in the focus on mathematics. I have a wonderful 7-year-old godson. And as a former math supervisor and educator, I know that this is problematic for historically underserved youth, especially our boys. And so one of the things I started doing with him was I started talking about how geometry exists in the real world. And this is what parents need to do. You know, you can look at their rooms and you can point out to them or ask them to point out to you what are the different geometrical shapes. And I used to ask Micah, you know, tell me all the straight lines that are in here. Tell me what all the triangles are. And he would just, you know, because of his age, he would tell me everything. But this is just not for his age. This is also for the older children in middle school as well as high school. Even though the mathematics becomes more complicated, there are still certain questions that you can ask them. And you can ask them, well, why is that mathematical concept important? And if they can't answer that question for you, then they need to go back and they need to ask their teacher, why is this important? Because what happens psychologically is if the content is important and it's applicable to their immediate world, then they will become focused on what the teachers are teaching and they will do better. And then we don't have statistics such as 70 to 80% of them not being employed. Because, you know, as an administrator, I'll sit down and I'll tell parents, are you going to take care of this child until they're 30 years old? And they get upset with me and they make their children focus. So they also have to ask questions such as, what type of jobs is this going to help me get? Okay. And if the child or the young person can't answer the question, they need to go back to the teacher and find out. Also, what type of business will use geometry? What type of business will use measurement? And see, when you ask those kind of questions and they go back and they make it the teacher's responsibility to answer them, then they become focused. And this is part of the research. The other thing I did with my godson was I started teaching him about measurement. And we actually pulled out like a measuring tape and we started doing estimation. We started measuring things. And I didn't want him to worry about giving me exact answers, but I wanted to expose him to measurement and geometry and then expose him to the importance, because if it's important, he'll focus on it. And today his teacher says he's very good in math. And so that is something that parents can do at home. Focus on the mathematics and the measurements in your home. Focus on the mathematics and measurements that are in the games that they play. Okay. Goal number 2, we need greater accountability for the traditional and charter schools. And it goes back to the statistics that I stated earlier. The unemployment rate is so high for the African American young people that are coming out of high school. You know, as a parent, as an educator, you have to ask the question, are you preparing my Black teenager to be a resident in my home forever. That's funny, because I believe the graduation rate for African Americans is 79%. Okay. And then some of them go off to college. That still leaves maybe 50% that are doing nothing. And so there has to be greater accountability for what they're producing. Maybe we have to look at schools that teach them skills and trades. I was walking in the neighborhood the other day and I saw some guys, they were working on the roof, and I looked at the business and the last name isn't an O. Well, that means they're probably Italian. And so this is something that Italians do. They do trade work. And so maybe this is something we have to look at as a community. Goal number 3. Now, they talk about civic literacy. And what I believe is they need to include in the civic literacy the 1619 project. And if you don't know anything about it, it originated with the New York Times Magazine in 2019, and they actually focus on the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans in the United States. We don't have an issue with the Holocaust, and we don't have an issue with infusing it into our curriculum, because this is something that happened to these people. There's other theories that say that didn't happen, but this is part of the nation's curriculum, is the Holocaust. Well, African Americans have had a similar experience. And so why can't our children benefit from that knowledge? And then at the same time, you have white kids who are learning what their ancestors really participated in. And so now we start to talk about different types of change. What I will say is that our president, he rejected Project 1619, him and a few senators, and they tabled it. And so, but this is something, if we can have the Holocaust, then we can have Project 1619. Okay. And so in conclusion, we talked about STEM education and funding. We talked about charter school transparency. What should worldwide education look like for our kids? Responses to bullying, civic literacy, Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights, and the Strengthen Diversity Act. The goals should be an emphasis on mathematics at home. We need charter and traditional public schools to be held accountable for the product that they are producing, period. And then an expansion of civic literacy to include Project 19. Now, before I open it up to the panel, I just want to remind you all that there is a contest. And the contest is that you go to the website, to the Anti-Racism Symposium at quarantineracism.com, and you make a suggestion for next week's topic. The winner, if we use your suggestion, you will win one of these t-shirts. You'll either win the Vogue series, which is in pink, or the Revolutionary series, which is in yellow. So sign up is very easy. You give your Facebook or your email. I've already have topics: politics, racism in schools, police brutality, teaching about racism in schools, workplace discrimination, or you can start your own topic. And so I'm going to end this in today's presentation, and then I want to open it up to the panel for any remarks, any suggestions, or any questions. Oh, I hear somebody in the back. So what do you all think about the Project 1619? Oh, I got to unmute y'all. Okay, let me take care of that. Okay, so ask to unmute. Ask to unmute. So that should be everybody. Everybody? Yeah, I think everybody's unmuted.
Okay.
So did you have any responses, Mr. Agar?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Dr. Derek. Thank you, Minister Sheila. Um, this is a great presentation. What would be helpful is to show it being balanced as opposed to skewed on one side. I don't know if I missed that in the previous thing, but to show the positive of the Democratic platform, the positive of the Republican platform, the negative of the Democrat, and the negative of the Republican, as opposed to, because it's steering almost as, oh, we're taking for granted what the Democratic platform is the best platform, as opposed to, like, for example, one of the things that I know is articulated that's a positive in the Republican side is that it focuses on money going with the child, as opposed to money coming from the state or money coming from the local government. So if money is to the child, then the child can place their body in the place where they're getting best educated, and the money goes with them. That way, to make sure it helps give an incentive to have the education be better, as opposed to where, like right now, our you raise great points with, like, how they change STEM to STEAM and everything. At the same time, our math standards are consistently declining, and there's a reason for that. And
Okay.
it doesn't seem like for example, I found out that there was a study that said one of the biggest things to help children is to teach them philosophy. If a child understands or learns philosophy, meaning learning to reason, evidence, and like, what is the study of truth? How do we study what we know? That helps them to outperform private school students. And part of it is played out with students right now are told that there is no truth. And that flies in the face of mathematics. You have to have a truth in order to do mathematics. But if you're going by the social studies where, oh, you can't say something's right or wrong, there's no right or wrong. And it's like, oh, well, then that doesn't work with the hard sciences.
Now, you said a couple of things, and I wanted to give a couple of responses. You talked about the Republicans focus on the money moving with the child. So instead of coming from the state. And so what happens, first of all, what happens is the school district's budget from the federal entities is only about 7%. Okay. Everything else, 93% actually comes from the state. But when you spoke to me about moving with the child, from what I read in the past, that was part of the focus on the charter school to private school type of movement, because they were really, and this happened a lot in Minnesota under Betsy DuBois, who's now in charge of the Department of Education down there. But that was her focus, was if you went to a private school, then that money that they were spending on the child should move to the private school. And I did speak to, that's one of the major differences between the Republican platform and the Democratic platform, was that the Democrats don't believe that private schools should have any monetary benefit from public money.
Right, but I didn't see a chart that said that. You said that, but then had a chart on the Democratic side. And what wasn't said in that is the focus was the charter school, not the private school. So more of the parents, actually, in the study, a lot of Black parents want their kids to be in a charter school, because if the money went to the charter school that were out, where they test out what is actually working, not where somebody comes up with this system and it's like, oh, well, has it worked anywhere? Well, we don't know. We're going to just try this thing. And it's like, oh, don't experiment with my child. I'd rather do with what works, kind of a deal.
Right. Well, one of the things that we know about charter schools is that the educational outcome is not much different than private school. They still haven't proved that charter schools make an academic difference. But what charter schools are known for is they're known for being safer, because they have, if you go to a charter school and your child acts out, you can send that kid back to the sending school. So you can actually develop a culture where a parent can go to work, a Black parent, Hispanic parent can go to work and feel comfortable that their child is safe. And that is the one strong point that charter schools have. The children are safe, and it's a twofold process. But you also talked about philosophy, and you talked about teaching reasoning. And so that is one of the fallacies that we're not getting from math, is that let me rephrase that. They're actually teaching reasoning, but the kids don't understand, why do I need to know that type of reasoning? Whereas if you're teaching philosophy, at least you're finding out, why you have this type of reasoning, or why you may have this type of reasoning. And that's why I made the suggestion that parents need to focus on their child knowing the importance of the content. Because if they know the importance of the content, then and this is I can't remember her name. This is something that they use in New Jersey schools. If the child knows the importance for the reasoning, then they will know why they have to learn it, and they become successful. So, for example, I was looking at geometry today, and I love geometry. I'm a former math supervisor. And I saw this one section that says proofs. And I mean, I myself like proofs because I want to prove something right, or I want to prove it wrong. But if you don't tell a young person how that is important in everyday life, then why should I really focus on it? And then when they have something like that on the state assessment, our kids don't do well. And so I agree when you say philosophy is probably one way to go, but it's because they're also teaching the kids why those different philosophical points are important.
Right. And that's why I'm trying to make a distinction. Philosophy is different from math. Philosophy is, how do I know what I know? Right. How do I know what is true? And if they have that, then what is shown is, for example, if kids try to make other kids do something, they have a frame of reference to say, hey, that's not right. And not to just follow somebody, but to be able to understand what is right, what is wrong, through understanding philosophy, where they might not understand, like you said, understand the point of geometry right off the bat, or get to understanding why do we do calculus and stuff like that. But people can understand, well, how do I even know that I'm existing, or how do I know what is right? And also, if I come from a framework where the philosophy is there's no right, then it's like, oh, I could be anything. So I could be, like you said, cross-gendered or whatever. And it's like, oh, that doesn't work with objective truth.
Okay. Now, you did talk about the imbalance in my presentation. And the only reason I did it that way was because we pretty much have known what the Republican platform has been. And so that's why I kind of narrated it instead of doing it in a display form, because I'm very interested in what the Democrats want to do. I'm also very interested because what I really saw was I didn't see anything either in the Republican platform or the Democratic platform that speaks specifically to racism in schools, okay? Teacher discrimination. So, and if you really think about it, we've had a United States Department of Education probably since 1957, and we still have the same problem. So, you know, if something's going to change for our young people, we as stakeholders and people who care about these young people, we have to start to change their language, and we have to start asking them for more, to be more specific on how you're going to help and respond to these young people. You have up to 70-80% African American males between 18 and 25 who are unemployed, and then you wonder why they get angry and tear stuff up. You know,
Well,
if I can't get out, if I can't get out and earn some money so I can at least feed myself, you know, we are allowing them to create a perpetual cycle of poverty, and we just can't allow that. We can't, whether you're Republican or whether you're Democrat. If you are truly for the benefit of children, you can't allow a perpetual cycle of poverty.
I agree. I agree. And so that's why things have to change. If, like you said, this has been for years, it's almost like if we were hiring somebody and for 40 years they never did the job, then it's like we would fire them. And but the way the teachers union is set up, you can't fire somebody. That's why I was saying, or that's why I think maybe a reason why a lot of parents like the charter school thing, because it's like, okay, my money will go to an area where they're forced to change, or else I'll take my child out. And to help the, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay.
I'm not, go ahead.
Okay. And I was just saying, what really would help the presentation, as strong as it is to show balance, meaning if you don't show both sides, it's like saying, hey, I'm a referee and you have on Eagles gear. And it's like, hey, you're not impartial. And so it automatically kind of takes away a little bit, where it's like, oh man, and you did say something negative, but then it's like, there's not anything positive on this other side to even merit putting it side by side.
Right.
Because then what happens if all of a sudden it's like, hey, the things on this side are actually the things that don't work. Or there's enough things on the other side that's like, hey, I want this thing. Like, I don't like the racism thing, but I'm like, the charter school. Like, yep, absolutely. I don't see where that wouldn't be a benefit to choose.
Well, one of the things that I noticed also was they focus on the terminology of low income. And so what many people don't know is that, and I said this the other day to my aunt, she's an educator. She's been an educator she's been in education for almost 50 years. I said, the reality is there are more poor white people than there are black people. If you look at the general numbers, now percentage wise, there are more poor black people. But what happens is that becomes so generalized that it also sends an alarm off in my head that maybe the monies is not being spent for where it's really needed. And if you come back and if you have if you do like maybe some of these other civic organizations and you sue, they've already put the language in place so that they can't sue. But I'm just hold it for me. I just want to know, is there anybody else that would like to say anything? Anybody else has a different point of view, different perspective? I see there's a Bernice Tet, and then there's a Campbell, another Campbell here.
Yeah, so I do have a question, a little bit off topic. I just wanted to have you address, how do you, with the way schools are going and potentially leaning back to more virtual type learning, how do you initiate these types of programs or or even implement what's being put in place, given the new, the culture of or how school is going now, and how school may even migrate away more from being in the building.
Well, the only thing that the remote learning is doing is it's changing the vehicle that they're using to deliver the information. It hasn't transformed the expectations. Children still are expected to do well on the state assessment. Teachers are still expected to teach for 5.5, 6 hours a day to whatever grade level they're teaching to. I think it's something that's going to be with us for a while. And I'm in a school right now, and the teachers I see, they're making pretty good adjustments. They're making pretty good adjustments. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Okay. So I wanted to go back, Ty, you said something about the union. So actually in public education, teachers do get fired. Okay. But we don't hear about it because it's a human resource issue. And because it's a human resources issue, you can't make it public. But teachers in schools, if they do certain acts, they do get fired, even if they're tenured. The main thing what happens in a school is administrators normally don't take the time to document the problems. Okay. Or some of the teachers, when you put them on corrective action plans, they make the adjustments. But teachers do get fired. I know last year in the school district I was in, there was a teacher who I think she was like a 20-year vet, and she did something with a student, which I'm not going to go into, but I do know they eventually fired her. And, the union, they wanted to fight it, but they said, hey, you can fight it if you want to, but all the information is just like any other type of job. All the information that we have, we did it by the rules that the union has outlined. And then like in New Jersey, they just take it to the State Board of Education, and State Board of Education approves it. Teacher's gone. So teachers can be fired. But I think what happens in charter schools is charter schools have more leeway because they normally don't have unions. That's the difference.
Is there a study on that? Because there was something I saw 2 years ago with New Jersey where somebody was charged with something and he was passed around. I'm sure I could Google it later or whatever. It's like, to me, the teachers union is like, if someone said, does the police discipline themselves? I'm like, nope, they do exactly what like the teachers unions do. Right. Teachers unions circle around and protect themselves. The police protect themselves. And it's like, if somebody doesn't point out the bad apples, it makes everybody kind of look bad.
Well, a lot of it depends on what the teacher does. Of course, if they attack a student, if they assault a student, that actually becomes a legal issue. And they take an oath. Every educator takes an oath regarding your behavior, and you can terminate the teacher based off of those type of behaviors. But then if you have a teacher, let's say you weren't on last week, or I think maybe you came a little late, but there was something about a teacher using it was a racially hostile environment. And I talked about what is a racially hostile environment, what are the clear definitions, and it became evident that the teacher wasn't producing that, but what she was producing was discrimination. And so most school districts don't attack discrimination. They attack other behaviors. And so that's why it seems like they're getting away with it. But then what happens is, if you're a teacher who has that kind of behavior, then and this is funny though, then you wind up with maybe 30 kids in your class and maybe the 30 worst kids in your class. So they use other vehicles to try to push you out, or to try to let you know maybe this is not the right job for you. But what I will say from an administrative perspective, when we find teachers that don't belong there, we get them out. We get them out. You don't read about it. You don't hear about it because it's a personnel issue, but we get them out of there.
I heard you about like sexual stuff or like deviant. What about just a teacher that doesn't teach? Like the person can't perform and the kids are not doing well. So maybe they should do something else other than teach. They're like reading a book instead of like actually having the kids learn something.
Well, that's actually, for me, that's actually borderline insubordination. So, and there's no legal defense for insubordination, but the reality is in a school district, they don't go after insubordination. What they go after is, okay, let me put this teacher on an improvement plan. And then if this teacher doesn't improve, because now I'm going to create a paper trail. And if this teacher doesn't improve, then I'll get rid of them. And so a lot of times you have to do 4 evaluations on the teacher in a year. If they get 1 evaluation, that's okay. They get to stay. So, and that's usually inside the contract, that says this is what has to happen to get them fired. I am a firm believer in protecting people's rights. And so I don't knock unions. What I knock is when we as administrators, we don't do the follow-up or do the paperwork that we need to do in order to get rid of these teachers. The other thing you have to look at is, the majority of the staff were understaffed most of the time. And so, if you're the boss, you don't want to have to be the one that goes in the classroom and then have to go back and do the principal thing at the same time. So you don't want to be understaffed. So some administrators elect to use professional development to improve their teachers. Most people that go into education, they don't go into education to sit behind a desk. Maybe that's what they were taught, but most people who, I would say 95% of the people who go into education because they want to see young people benefit. And then you have that 5% whose teaching skills are so bad that they figure, if I come in today, I give them a couple of worksheets, I sit behind my desk, I stay on my phone, and as long as I don't get caught, I'm good. We get rid of those. And actually, if you read New York, they're really good at getting rid of them, because they will actually send them to a specific school, and the school won't have kids, but they will have rooms that the teacher has to sit in and practice doing lessons and stuff like that. And then if they don't survive that school, they kick them out. But it's a process. It's not like the corporate world, where you even in unions in the corporate world, you still have to go through what you and with the corporate world and the union contract agreed on. So yeah, we get rid of them. We just don't. It just doesn't make national news,
Yeah, see, I would be all for tripling the rate that teachers are paid as long as you could fire them when they don't perform. So there's no way you could put more money if you can't get rid of the bad apples. And then even if it wasn't the 5% that's causing the problem, then I have an issue with what's being taught. Like, kids don't need to learn about jobs. They need to learn about wealth. They need to learn about having a business. Like the Italian person that you talked about, he owned that business.
Right.
He wasn't trying to get a job. He was where he's asking, hey, please hire me. Like, if kids learn the skills to build their own business, if it's as an auto mechanic, or if it's as a nurse or what have you, I think it's better to learn how to have a business as opposed to just focusing on the job.
Well, see, but as Blacks, we have a different challenge. Now, more than likely, this guy that I saw, he either got his business one of two ways. He learned from his family, or he learned at school. But somewhere along the line, it became important to him, and it became something that he enjoyed. And this is the one thing that we're not telling our kids during instruction. We don't tell them how this applies to real life and why this is important. Because once they figure that out, then they figure out exactly what it is they really want to do. You know, I don't think every child grows up and says, because I play video games 20 hours a day, that I want to be a video game designer. No, I don't think. But when they find out, and this is what happens to the kids who really do well, they find out, oh, you know what? I can be a doctor and do it well, or I can be a Wall Street trader and do well. I can own a financial company, but we don't tell them that. We just throw this information at them. And you remember the dynamics of the Black community. You normally have one parent at home, you know, and especially the Black community, majority of them are female centered. And so, and she's probably working 12, 13, 14 hours a day. And if her kids are little, you know, that complicates it. Then when they're bigger and the content becomes a little more, what do I want to say? A little more difficult because they're not content specialists. We have to give them certain strategies that they can use no matter what level the kids are at. And so when you start asking questions like, why is this important? How do you use this in a regular job? How do you explain to me, how do you use this in a business? And then when a kid can answer, when a kid can answer those questions, the parent now can use it as a guide. Because if they come back home and let's say they're doing geometry and they're learning about angles, and they find out that angles can be applied to plumbing, and they're like, whoa, I could be a plumber. And then, you know, the parent starts having this discussion about being a plumber. Okay, well, what does it take to be a plumber? Well, you got to know this. You may have to go to this school, this. And so now the education that the teachers are bringing to the table are more important. And so one of the focuses of what I do is to give parents those type of strategies that, one, are easy to implement, because I'm not going to ask them to be content area specialists. They're not going to be able to do that. But at the same time, something that they can also utilize to help manage the young people that they have in their homes. And so that's what I really, really and truly focus on.
So, Dr. Derek, you don't feel that it's sort of like a conspiracy where the schools are actually undereducating our kids on purpose? For example, the schools right now are very feminized. And I've heard that Black women are one of the highest educated groups in society right now. At the same time, the degrees that Black women are getting their masters and higher level degrees are in stuff that has zero economic value in the marketplace. So it's like, wow, you took all this debt and you majored in psychology, and where are you using psychology? And it's almost like, oh my goodness. And this is the people that were fed, like nurtured all through the school system, and they ended up taking something that has no value.
Well, well, you said conspiracy. I remember when I was going, and we're almost out of time. I was going through my doctoral program, and I was talking to one of my professors, and she was white female professor. And I was sitting in her office, and she started talking about a permanent underclass. And I said, huh? A permanent underclass? And she said, yeah, that's what we have to, as educators, we have to be able to modify what we do so that we are not the contributors to a permanent underclass. But when you look at the employment rate for African-American males, that is what they are creating. But there are other dynamics. 85% of the teaching force is white female. And, you know, I developed this theorem. It's called the Recelerate theorem. And if you come into opposition to a white female, society reacts to you in a negative manner, and then they extend it. So if you take that to school, this is why we have discipline problems at school, because most of the administrators are white. And so the first thing they may say is, well, why are you talking? And they may not say this out loud, but the rules say, well, why are you talking to this white female this way? So there's definitely, and I, we live in a society where there's three classes. There's upper class, there's middle class, and there's lower class. And so what we have to focus on, and this is why I say we have to go back to ensuring parents know that they can use the strategy to talk to their kids about why it's important. Why is it? How do you use it in business? How do you use this in the workforce? Because now, instead of being unemployed, you start to, as you said earlier, reason, how can I get income when I get out of high school so that I'm not part of this permanent underclass? And so we got a lot of work to do, but somebody has to help out the Black parents. We're divided at home. I think part of the reason that we have an influx of the Black females in regards to academics is because they've beaten down the African American male so bad. I mean, how many African American females get killed by the police? Come on. How many African American females are being incarcerated compared to African American males? So absolutely there's a conspiracy. But we have to start with the family, and we have to start teaching those mothers who are courageous enough to get up in the mornings, go to work, make sure their children are fed in the absence of the father. We have to help them and give them strategies that they can use at home. And so with that in mind, I'm going to end here. Just to let you all know, we'll be back next week. Same time. As I stated earlier, I want you to go to the website. I want you to register for the Quarantine Racism Forum. And it's real easy. You can either give your email or you can give your Facebook credentials. And then I need for you to recommend a topic for the next session. That way, the winner will get the t-shirt. And, we'll be surprised how many people will respond to your topic. All right. And so with that, thank you very much. Have a great evening. And I look forward to seeing everyone next week.